I suppose the reason it's called Bang Bang's 40 Coats is that while we've been running this project, Storymap, going around Dublin finding interesting stories and mapping them online, the one thing that struck us about Dublin, and the one thing we've gotten to love about it, isn't the fact that it's really beautiful, because it really isn't. And it's not the fact that it's not the richest city in the world, clearly, either, but it's full of mentals, you know? Frankly, I mean, if you're in the audience and if you look to your left or your right, you'll probably see a mental, frankly. The amount of oddballs and strange people we've met throughout Dublin. And we've come to see it seems to be part of Dublin culture that these oddballs are kind of not only tolerated, but kind of supported. And it's a thing that's gone down. I mean, this night is called Bang Bang's 40 Coats after two of the most famous strange people to have lived in Dublin. Two street characters who just became local legends based on their outrageous activities. One who thought he was a cowboy, and the other who just wore 40 coats. And it's one thing that's kind of dotted throughout Dublin history as we've researched it. It's kind of Dublin history is generally just one long story of misery and struggle, but it's peppered by these just weirdos, you know, who keep it alive and make it palatable. And I'm sure like everyone here tonight would have some kind of story they describe as typically Dublin, in that something peculiar or strange happened on a night in Dublin or something like that. And so our storytellers are going to tell a few odd stories about Dublin that happened to them. And all the comedians kind of are ones who kind of dabble in the peculiar and the odd. And the same goes for the musicians at the end. But I'm going to start the night with actually a story of my own peculiar night in Dublin, probably the most peculiar night I've had in Dublin, which was the night, 2 years ago, where I tried to bring back 3 girls to my apartment, which was surprisingly difficult because they weren't really all that real. Anyway, I was living on Cork Street at the time, and I was on my way back to my apartment with my friend Max. Now, my friend Max is, he's a very likable guy. He's a big American, with kind of bouncy enthusiasm all the time. He kind of was like a big Andrex puppy, but an Andrex puppy that's just smoked way too much weed. He forgot everything, and he'd always say, "Dude, my head is like Swiss cheese, you know, that things go in and then they just get lost. And then they pop out, and you're like, what? And basically, but myself and Max hadn't been speaking when this thing took place, because I'd really fallen for a girl, and things hadn't really worked out, and Max was kind of, forgetfulness was one of the reasons why they didn't. But we were walking along anyway, not really talking, really late at night, and suddenly I stopped, because I'd just seen like a vision. It was incredible. There were these 3 girls, 3 visionary girls, just standing there on Cork Street in these beautiful corsets and negligees, stocking. I mean, it was a cold winter's night. And I just said, wow, you know. And Max stopped, and he looked at the same billboard I was looking at. And he said, well, dude, yeah, the Sugar Babes are awesome, you know? I really love their track, you know, push the button and that. And I said, you know, Max, I looked at him, I said, some lucky guy gets to, like, you know, have dinner with those girls, or sort of wake up and see one of them smiling across from him. And I sighed, and Max said, well, dude, you know, you should have that. And I said, well, that's really nice, Max. He's like, no, I'm gonna get it for you, Tom. So he marched up to the billboard and grabbed an end of it and tried to pull the poster off. But it was one of those ones that was kind of like, you know, painted on with glue, so only a shard of it pulled off. And I said, well, that was a nice gesture, Max, thank you, it's grand. But I was walking away when I heard the pull of wood pulling off wall. And I turned around and he was trying his damnedest, so he said, well, dude, help me. So I ran up and we began to pull off this giant billboard. I mean, it was, you know, this high, this, even wider, twice that high. and just fringed in this heavy wood. So eventually we jumped over the other side of this fence and began to kick it from the other side through the railings. And finally, we'd just about gotten it, like all the nails were out except one huge block of wood up the top, and it was immovable. And I said, well, we tried our best, Max, it just wasn't good enough. And Max said, no, dude, we don't give up. This is a mission. I'm gonna go back and get the tools. You mind the girls. And I sat down, and frankly, at this point, I was a bit annoyed with the sugar babes. So I sat down and put my back to them, because frankly, I started thinking, I mean, with girls, it's either one thing or another. It's like they don't want a relationship, or they do want a relationship, but you don't, and then, or they're like stuck to a fence by a large block of wood. And I looked across the road, and honestly, on the other side of Cork Street, there was this billboard with a poster of Westlife. And it just looked so easy to take off, you know? And I was thinking, Christ, you know, the gay option's always easier. Anyway. And finally, Max came back with his tools, which was just a hammer. And he came up, and with a few almighty whacks, the wooden block gave up its tenure on these girls, and the whole billboard just crashed onto the ground, this huge almighty crash. And so loud, actually, that 5 floors up on the other side of the road, this girl woke up, came out and screamed at us from the other side, asked us, did we think we were smart? Clearly we didn't think we were smart. And so we were a mile away from the apartment. We picked it up and began to walk. And it was the heaviest, it had been raining, so the wood was soggy and heavy. There were rusty nails coming out of it. And we shouldered it and began to march down the road towards the apartment. And I honestly did feel not unlike Jesus with the cross, you know? And finally, after like ages of this, it just went on and on, this march. We got to the apartment complex, which has this kind of big kind of buzz gate and a little door to get through to the stairs. So we got through the buzz gate and everything was grand. And then we opened the door, and no matter what we do, it just wouldn't fit. And it was just, we switched it every which way we could. It was just that much too. And Max said, well, that's it, you know? And I said, I was now on a mission. I said, no, Max, in my drunken mind, all I wanted to do was to wake up knowing the sugar babes were in my apartment. And so I said, no, Max, we don't give up. So I grabbed the hammer and began to wallop off the wooden sides of this billboard to try and make it just that bit smaller to bring through. And I passed it to him, and he began to whack off the other side, and we were kicking them off. And finally, we were just about to blast the last bit off when the door just swung open. And I looked around, and all I could see was this flashlight on my face, and through it I could definitely see the glint of a baseball bat in the background. And I realized, oh no, and Max just dropped the hammer and said, sugar babes. And they yelled at us, they're like, what are you doing? What are you doing here? And I said, that's normally what I say in those scenarios. And eventually, after a moment, they kind of lowered the flashlight, and I realized it was my neighbors. And they said, oh, it's you, Tom. They said, we thought you were robbers, you know? And unfortunately, while I was kind of down about this girl generally, I hadn't been checking the post much, so I had missed all these warnings every day, saying there were loads of burglars and to be on the alert and to take things into your own hands. Which is a bit scary when I did read them. But the neighbor said, oh God, but it's a bit too late because... And they didn't really have to finish the sentence because a police siren behind us finished it for us. And these guards came out, they're big, thick country guards, as you'd expect. And they came up and they were like, what's happening here, lads? You know. But the neighbour said, listen, guards, it was all a mistake. We rang it. They're not robbers. They're just a bit retarded. And so we thought we'd cleared it up, and we explained, listen, we're just taking this billboard back to the apartment. And they said, oh, so you stole private property then? And we suddenly froze. And Max, if there was ever a moment for Max's Swiss cheese brain to suddenly give him the right answer, it was now. And he suddenly said, "Oh, dude, no, we didn't steal it. We found it lying on the ground. Some assholes stole it. We were making sure it wasn't a nuisance to people." And so eventually, they clearly didn't buy this, but they realized that that was the right line to use. So they said, "Okay, but where'd you find it?" We said, "Oh, just about a mile up the road, you know." And they said, "Oh, well, just bring it back then." I said, "Oh no." So we shouldered it, and they drove their guarded car so slowly beside us at walking pace. And Max lost it at one point. He just yelled at them. He's like, "Dude, you know, it'd be so much faster if we just put it on the car and you drove it up a mile." And they said they looked through and they put on their little thing. They were like, why do you have a hammer in your pocket?" And so Max was like, "What? If you found it, why do you have a hammer in your pocket? That kind of shows you stole it." "Okay, dude, we'll carry this stupid thing." So we marched all the way up, and it was a defeating walk back, to say the least. I mean, it's bad enough when you have to walk back not having gotten a girl you were really into, but not having gotten 3 imaginary girls. And finally, I remember clearly, because me and Max shared a room, and as I was going to sleep, I just heard him just before I went to sleep go, "Dude, I hope the sugar babes know what we did for them." So that's my story.